what brought about this point of change in your career where, the modern management books couldn't give the answer that a 2,500-year-old epic could?
There are some principles which don't change. The concept of leadership does not change. AI is just a tool. It doesn't have purpose. It can't discern. There are three things, which would make him an ideal CEO. High agency, low ego, and very high.
Joining us today is Anil Srinivas Chilla, decoding leadership case studies from the Ramayana to authoring the book, The Ramayana, A Guide to Practical Leadership. Anil is teaching the modern world how to stay human in today's time.
The most important factor of a team being high performing is psychological safety.
Imagine a leader who has spent decades scaling the digital empires of Levi, Dell, L'Oreal, only to realize that the most advanced frameworks were written almost thousands of years ago. So welcome back to Build with Shreya, where ideas and stories inspire you to build something extraordinary. So let's welcome Anil Chilla to Build with Shreya. But before that, if you're a tech enthusiast and you want to learn about different industries, you are an industry leader wanting to innovate in your own industry, make sure to like, subscribe, and share our channel to stay updated on our latest podcasts. Anil, we're super happy to have you on our podcast at Build with Shreya. And today is a very different session because we want to see how you're sort of delved into interlinking ancient wisdom with how modern organizations are working. So we're super excited to get that knowledge from you and understand how leadership can be looked at from a different lens, that too going back thousands of years.
Thank you so much, Shreya. I'm so happy to be here and at your podcast. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So in an era where AI can optimize almost every business metric, what is one leadership trait from ancient wisdom that technology cannot replicate?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great starting question, right? And very close to the work that I'm doing. So the most important principle is what we call viveka or discernment, the ability to have the right judgment. Now, viveka comes from, a Sanskrit word called which means to separate, right? So if you think about it, it's about separating the grain from the chaff, to separate the signal from the noise. Right, so that's what is the most important in the current day. Which we can use from the olden times. So it's not just about separation; it's also about realizing what is important versus what is urgent. Right, not only that, but it's also purpose, loyalty, compassion, empathy, the human values versus just a transactional relationship. Right. So when you look at it, all these sort of are encompassed under the concept of viveka. So the ability to separate, use wisdom to separate, what is really the purpose versus the not so important.
So when you enter a legacy giant, do you start by fixing the tech stack? Or do you start by fixing the mindset of the people who are holding those tools?
Yeah, great question, sort of a clear, very beautiful segue from the previous question. It's always about the mindset first. It's never about the technology. Having said that, mindset is a very soft, fuzzy word, right? Yeah. That's not what we use, right? So we may talk about it, but a little more, it needs to be a little more functional. It needs to be a little more emotional in that sense, right? And it's always about the contrast that we are creating, right? In what a specific capability can bring and the change in the thought processes. And more importantly, it's not a one-time, one-shot kind of an affair. It needs to be a continuous process over a period of time. And it needs to it needs to be like a wave which takes everybody upwards, right? And the most important thing here, if you think about it, it's never about, that this technology delivers this. It's about what is the consumer problem or the business problem that the technology solves, right? Most often, what I've seen when all these transformation initiatives happen is, we become very, very enamored with the technology. like what's happening with AI. And a few years back, it was the metaverse. And before that, it was the social media platforms and so on and so forth. It's never about that. It's really about how does it make life better for the consumer, number one? How does it make life better for our teams and employees, number two, right? And that's where we need to start with. And eventually, the way to, sort of do this is to, use a variety of tactics eventually to move the entire organization. And it's not enough, and just to give an example, at L'Oreal, it was not only the marketing teams or the digital teams which were trained on digital transformation. Everybody, of the 60 or 70,000 employees, at that point in time, there was a goal to train everybody. Everybody had to go through a training. So the whole company doesn't go digital, just by training the marketing teams.
No, totally. I think when we talk about, we'll talk about it later as well, about change management. I think it needs to go to the bottom of the pyramid.
Correct.
All of the things that we're implementing cannot just be limited
Correct.
to a certain aspect of the company.
Correct.
And I think there's one thing you mentioned about, how we are looking at consumers, right? So now consumers are interacting with data in a very different fashion.
Yeah.
So it's not anymore about mass broadcasting.
Yes.
We're
True.
talking about data sovereignty. We're talking about first party data.
Yeah.
Right. So in that aspect, as data laws are also tightening,
Yeah.
how does a brand go about building a data soul where consumers are actually wanting to share the data with it?
Yeah, and I love the term data soul. I'm hearing it for the first time, so first of all, I love it, right? It's not about data. There's something behind data which you're referring to, and that's perhaps the most important thing, right? So, for example, in my last role at L'Oreal, we moved our data from about 5 million PII records to almost 20 million PII records, right? 4x. But the most important thing is not about the data per se. Okay, there are different types of data in the ecosystem. We've got first party data, second party, third party, and perhaps the most important, the zero party data, right? So, it's really what is it delivering to the consumer? Why should a consumer give the data to us? What benefit are they getting as a result? And we called it the value exchange. So if a consumer is giving you something, what is the value that we are providing to the consumer? It could be in the form of information. It could be in the form of discount. It could be in the form of, personalization. It could be in the form of sort of a advisory, consultation, and so on and so forth, usage and so on and so forth, right? The holy grail really here is how much zero-party data that we can get from the consumer. And zero-party data is what the consumer shares on a voluntary basis. It's not about the consumer, you saying, oh, please give me this data. No, it doesn't work that way. So think of a loyalty program. Think of an exclusive club that you're going to join. Aren't you, looking to fill, a long form with your mother's maiden name and everything just to join the exclusive club? Why is the consumer or why is someone who's aspiring to be a member willing to give that? Because they see value for what data that they're giving. And that is zero-party data, right? And a specific example of that at L'Oreal was this whole Modiface, AR, VR, what we call the virtual try-on, the skin diags that we used to do, right? So it was about consumer sees a benefit because they don't need to go to a store to try on different lipsticks or different skin creams and so on and so forth, right? They can be where they are in the comfort of their home room with their privacy and try, as many shades as they want. And what we saw were fantastic results, right? So on an average, a consumer tried 8 times, a particular lipstick. A conversion went 3x, right? And our basket size went 2x, right? So, obviously, we didn't start by saying that, okay, I need to hit 8 trials per consumer. It doesn't work that way. It starts by what is the value that the consumer is getting? What is the benefit, at the end of the day? How does it improve the consumer's experience, right? And that is what we need to start with. And the technology is just an enabler. And in my view, most often, as a technology or a ex-digital or a business guy, usually the cart is before the horse, which is you talk a lot about technology and not enough about the consumer and the problem that we're solving.
So, I mean, first you touched upon that, one of the ancient wisdom techniques that we can look at it is vivek, right? Sort of being able to discern between different aspects. And then we spoke about how the mindset is of prime importance when you're approaching a large giant about anything. And it could be relating to something related to like data soul, as we spoke about, like looking at how much zero party data we can work with.
Correct.
And how it will benefit the consumer if they were to provide more data.
Sure.
Right? So how would you stitch it together for the audience, when in terms of approaching a large giant, considering that they are probably working for one, they are probably wanting to innovate for one. How can they combine the principle of vivek in taking decisions around data, around mindset change within the organization?
This is a beautiful question, right? So, and change management, while the term may be new, it has been existing for probably the longest period of time, right? So, if you look at, a variety of frameworks from a change management standpoint, there's one particularly which I particularly like, right? And this is called Chaturopaya, which means, four ways, four ways of convincing someone. And the principle is called Samadana Bhed Dand. Okay, so Samadana Bhed Dand, we use a lot in our conversations, in normal conversations, but in a corporate context as well, this works equally well. Now, Sama is about friendship or convincing through logic, convincing with, some sort of a balance, hey, this is what's in there for you, right? So if you deliver, if we go through this change, this is the outcome that we will see, right? And just showing that, and then that's logic. Dana means incentivizing. Incentivizing means, okay, if we go through this, this is the benefit, the monetary or, functional or whatever benefit that we will see, whether it's to the consumer, whether it's to the organization, growth, revenue, profits, whatever, right? Whatever metrics, which sort of provide that incentive to, our various teams, right? Now, Bheda means where you're saying that you're creating a difference. So Bheda technically means difference, right? So what you're doing here is you're saying that if we stay here, this is what the outcome is. And if we go, if we do this, this is what we will see. And, it's a binary, you got to make a choice. And what would you choose, right? So you're creating that doubt or creating that, discernment or that division in the minds of people, right? And then finally, you always have those people who are resistant to change. So for them, then you have, the danda. Danda means some monetary or some sort of punishment. Obviously, in the olden times, the punishment would be physical.
Yeah.
We are not talking about that here, obviously, in the modern organization context. So it would be in terms of something taken away, some, I'll say, a monetary benefit, sub benefit being taken away, right? So if you combine these frameworks, and that's typically how change management works in an organization. You have a big vision, mission, you have a strategy, you say this is imperative for us to do. That's all, part of what the change or transformation teams work on at all points in time, right? So, if you think in terms of, say, give it a modern name, then you'll have the curious, the cautious, the resistant, people for change, right? So that's exactly what Samadana, Bheda, and Danda mean, right? And incidentally, in Ramayana, this is used brilliantly at many, many different instances, right? And one of the most brilliant instances is Hanuman using it to create, to convince people to go in the direction, but but by creating difference within the Vanara, the Vanara army. So, I mean, a brilliant use, and perhaps, I can follow it up at a later point
Yeah,
in
because
terms of
I
the
have a
story.
question around what kind of differences, but we can touch upon that later. And I think at this point, it's a very interesting turn that we get into. You moved from a boardroom to Ramayana, right? And you turned to look at Ramayana not only as a religious text,
Yes.
but modern management
True.
case studies.
Yes.
So, what brought about this point of change in your career where, the modern management books couldn't give the answer that a 2,500-year-old epic could?
Yes. Yeah, that's a great question, right? And so I've been in traditional, corporate world for about a quarter century, right? 25 years, worked in many, many different businesses, worked in technology, fashion, beauty, commerce, etc., and worked across almost 20, 25 countries, right? Whether it's India or Southeast Asia or Australia, China, Japan, Korea, etc. And what I found is that there are some principles which don't change. The concept of leadership does not change, surprisingly, right? The way a leader behaves or the way a leader, works with their team, some principles are constant, irrespective of cultures. Obviously, how they are executed would be different, right? And that was the first insight for me. The second insight was I'm an avid, sort of reader and listener of texts. And of course, my introduction to Ramayana, as did for everybody else, came through the Amar Chitra Kathas and, the stories from
Yeah.
Nani, Nana, Dada, Dadi, and so on and so forth, right? But once I started going to Valmiki Ramayana and I listened to this, Guruji, who speaks, who gives discourses on Ramayana, but he always emphasizes the practicality of it, right? He says Ramayana is not a story of mythical creatures, or divine beings or gods and demons. If you look at Ramayana, if you peel the layers, it's basically a story of humans going through the ups and downs, the trials and tribulations, the sorrows and the joys of that time, right? Just like us. So as soon as we start removing, those veneer or layers or skins of divinity, spirituality, it becomes a brilliant text of leadership in action. It's really tough decisions being made and executed, right, in front of very, very, within very challenging contexts, right? And that was the insight that got to me that, okay, so here's this, study, an epic or a text or Ramayana, which has stood these 2,500, 3,000 years, in terms of time. And I could see the leadership parallels, what I was facing in my corporate, world, was exactly what I saw here in Ramayana, right? I felt, oh, these are very similar in terms of situations. And that sort of made that pivot in my mind, saying that, okay, so there is some practical, relevant insight that we can get from Ramayana, right? So it's not just about divinity, spirituality, magic, but it's really about applying it into the modern leadership or modern organizational way, right? And which is what my work has done, right? So presenting Ramayana as a set of case studies, a set of management case studies, which we can analyze in a typical situation analysis and takeaways method to sort of draw lessons and apply, on a practical today. In fact, into our corporate lives, right? So that was the major moment, and perhaps the most important reason, which I saw, was that I've been a leader. I've seen MNC leadership, right? And none of these role models actually were good enough. Okay, and because there is a compromise that happens at some point in time or the other. But leadership within the Indian context, or within, if you look at a Indian wisdom, the ancient Indian wisdom, or as presented in Ramayana, it's always about the organization first. It's always about the, a broader implication of society first, rather than the leader first. The leader, progresses and the organization progresses. No, the order is the organization and the people are happy. The welfare of the society leads to the welfare of the leader, in that order, right? And that made that, sort of leadership very humane, or leadership very all encompassing. And that was the, sort of the turning point for me.
So, you talk a lot about inner mastery.
Yes.
Right. And in tech, we talk about system optimization, but we're rarely optimizing the system of a leader's mind.
Yes.
And you practice Vipassana for mindfulness. What is your perspective around that a calm leader leads to a better PNL? Or do you think it is just a corporate wellness talk?
I find that question very humorous, to be honest, right? So let me share 2 points. Okay, first, there's a situation in Ramayana, where Hanuman calls Sugriva, who's his boss, a monkey. Not a monkey in terms of, that they are monkeys, but monkey in terms of his attitude.
Yeah.
So imagine going to your boss and saying, "Aap bandar ho ya aap you're a monkey or you're a donkey," right? I mean, that's a no. It's a career-threatening move, right? But Hanuman does it. And why? For good reason. Because at that moment, Sugriva is not stable. He's in a very fearful mode, right? And he's not making a decision. And Hanuman forces his boss to make a decision for him, right? Saying that, okay, stop vacillating, stop seesawing, make a decision, behave like a leader, right? That's what he says. And at that moment, Sugriva listens and then tells Hanuman that, okay, here's a decision. This is the moment when they meet Ram and Lakshman. But the most important principle that comes out of this story is something called psychological safety. And if you think in terms of, Sanskrit term, it's also called abhay, or psychological safety. Now, let's fast forward to 1998. So there's this professor, and which brings me to my second point. This professor called Professor Amy Edmondson, who's a professor of organizational behavior and psychology at Harvard University. She coined this concept called psychological safety, And what she was doing is she was looking at the research into organizations and teams. And what she was interested in was, what is the most important variable? What are the drivers of high-performing teams? What makes a team very effective or high-performing, right? And she looked at a lot of data, and what she found out was very, very interesting. It's not, the universities from which the people are hired from. It's not how intelligent people are. It's not what salaries that they're paid, as long as there's a baseline to that. It's not how many resources that they're given. It's not how many facilities that they're given. None of this matters. The most important factor of a team being high performing is psychological safety. What does it mean? The ability to have an open discussion, to dissent, and not just dissent within the team, but dissent with the leader. Okay?
Right.
Dissent, but with respect, which means that, you're not calling each other donkey or monkey and so on and so forth, but dissenting in a respectful way. And having that open conversation, because in a team, there are obviously many different perspectives. Listening to all the perspectives and making a decision that, most people are aligned with, right? Or agreeing to, or at least the decision is made after everybody is heard, right? And that is called psychological safety. And psychological safety is what determines the effectiveness of a team. One more data point. So there's this project which was done between 2010 and 2015 at Google. We know Google, right? Brilliant tech company, and so on and so forth. They asked the same question: what makes a team high performing within Google? And this project is called Project Aristotle, by the way. So Project Aristotle determined the same thing, which is psychological safety is the most important factor in whether a team is high performing or not. And where did we start this? We started this with a story in Ramayana.
Yes.
So, when you saw which teams was the effective team, which teams won eventually at the end of the day, it was Sugriva's team, right? And the way they made decisions in a collaborative way, and the way, even if, some people disagreed with it, they had an open discussion, they made a good decision and moved on. So the same principle that we see in Ramayana is now being validated in, sort of modern management theory, right?
Yeah, so if I were to summarize this, it would be like a calm leader leads to, in a way, having a psychological safety amongst their team members, where they could together achieve a level of clarity that could help in making better decisions to positively impact the P&L.
Yeah.
And since you've identified a bunch of frameworks in Ramayana, let's talk about Sita's resilience and Hanuman's service. And I have a very interesting parallel to make here. Let's say that if Hanuman was the head of operations of a tech startup in 2026, what is one trait that he would bring to the table that modern CEOs are missing right now?
I love the question. My name comes after Hanumanji, by the way. My name's Anil Kumar. Right? So, of course, my most favorite character in Ramayana is Hanuman. But not only for his strength and, intelligence
resilience,
and resilience, everything that we know of, but there are three things, which would make him an ideal CEO. And what I would look for in my CEO, right? High agency. The ability to take something and then own it and drive it, right? High agency, low ego.
Yes.
Very low ego, which means being humble to the point that, it is that the team's always bigger than a single individual, right? Ego. And very high mission focus, very, very high, sort of mission focus. And the way we would think about this is that, the story, that I can, sort of use from Ramayana here is that we all know how Hanuman went to, Lanka with his band of Vanaras, right? It was perhaps one of the most difficult searches, difficult, actions that this group had done. In fact, they thought of committing suicide, including Hanuman, thrice in this situation. But not only did they, despite all this, they sort of came out of the mission successfully, right? So if you think about it, what were the underlying traits which helped here? The first is agency, which means that not only did Hanuman find Sita, but the mission of getting extra intelligence from Lanka, which wasn't a part of the original mission, right? So extending the mission and converting that into a strategic advantage, right? And that is one, right? Low ego. And, when he describes his mission to Sita or to Ram and Sugriva, when he reports back, gives a project update on this, he doesn't mention his heroism at all. It's always about the team first, the band of Vanaras first. He credits everything to them, right? And the mission focus. The number of distractions, the number of challenges that they had on their journey to find Sita, they overcame all that. There were moments when they were about to give up. As I mentioned, they were willing to, they were contemplating suicide, but they still, sort of kept the focus on the mission, right? And got it. So if I were to summarize the three qualities, You asked me for one. I said, let me give you
We always like more.
3x, which is high agency, low ego, mission focus.
And what has happened now is you've taken all of this beyond the boardroom. So you've
Yeah.
trained over 750 teachers
Yes.
on mental resilience using frameworks from the Ramayana. So
Yeah.
why teachers, and how does that change the entire landscape?
Yeah. Great question. We are digital people, Shreya, right? So we always believe in pilots, MVP, and then we talk about scaling, at a very large, sort of into a very large environment, right? So for me, my book was the MVP, which is the minimum viable product, which is a set of ideas, but they're ideas within a book. Where they need to land, where they need to scale is with, the younger generation, the next generation of leaders, right? And what better than school? So for me, this was all about training the trainers, train the trainers, and so that the teachers themselves can, sort of share it with the next generation of students, and talk to them, from what we call the first principles, what leadership means. And, they sort of imbibe these principles and then practice them in their own, careers and lives, making them much more happy and effective, as a not just as a professional, but as a leader as well.
And so, in your opinion, what does a Ramayana style high performing team look like in a modern startup?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I described, my favorite moment, which I was briefly describing, was the moments where this team of Vanaras went to South. They were a lot of, they were an unruly bunch in a way, right? So they had a lot of difficulty. They overcame these challenges. They had a lot of dissent in between. They argued with each other. They wanted to abandon the mission. They wanted to go, they were contemplating suicide, but they still did not give up on the mission, right? And that, in my view, is the essence of a great team, which is that you have all the debate internally, but at the end of the day, even if you disagree, you commit to a mission. So disagree and commit, right? In that sense. So that to me is, and of course, and the underlying factor of that is psychological safety in a team. So to me, a great team is where you have that open debate, discussion, psychological safety, but eventually you make the right decision. Everybody commits to it.
So you spent years in the conversion and funnel world, and
Yeah.
now e-commerce is sort of moving into a single conversational layer,
Yeah.
right? So what is your perspective around invisible tech, specifically in the e-commerce area?
Yeah. I've spent 15 years in the e-commerce area, right? So yes, it is moving to the conversational layer. It's leading towards chat more and more. In that sense, therefore, that e-commerce layer, that invisible tech that you're talking about, becomes infra. Like what we had servers in the old world or cloud, in the recent world, all these layers eventually become, what you call infra, right? But even in the chat interface, you still need to, showcase the product, have a proper conversation, right? And sort of have the right engines popping up, the right recommendations, etc. Where are these coming from? They're coming from the e-commerce layer, right? Yeah. So that's what needs to happen, probably in a much smaller interface, which is a conversational interface now.
Mm-hmm. You have scaled brands across the APAC, the entire Southeast Asia, and you must have seen strategies crash the moment they hit local realities.
Yes.
And since you've been associated with the global e-commerce forum,
yeah,
what do you think is one superpower that India has that rest of the world does not?
Sure. So I call it, I call it contextual ambidexterity.
Okay.
So that's a big word. Let me explain what that means. It means the ability to hold two opposite ideas at the same time. The ability to, not only hold, but operate in two different realities at the same time. Let me explain this further with an example, right? At L'Oreal, not only were we operating at, in luxury, at the highest end of luxury, in the most, I'll say, premium salons across India, but we were also operating in the Kirana stores at the same time. What that means is, when you look at Indian leaders, right, they are able to operate at the mass level and at the lux level and everything in between. The ability to, sort of navigate a challenging situation. So when you hear about India, India technically is not a single market. It's a market of many markets.
Yes.
Ranging from the mass, low price, cutthroat pricing, very competitive, to very, very high, premium, ultra high branding, luxury led, right, etc. So, and all that is in between. So the ability to operate at so many different realities, operate within so many mini markets, is what distinguishes, which in my view is a superpower for many, Indian leaders. And that's why we see Indian leaders, navigate the corporate world quite successfully because of their ability to navigate so many different realities at simultaneously. So that's contextual ambidexterity.
That leads to my next question. We worked across markets where strategy isn't just about growth. It's about positioning, like when to scale, when to hold back, when to compete. So these decisions are deeply contextual. And so how do you personally take a call in such a case? When to build, when to collaborate, when to compete. How do you go about it?
Yeah. So like all things in life, nothing is black and white. It's all gray. And that's where frameworks help, right? And that's why we've known the 4 Ps, the 7S, and the BCG matrix and so on and
The
so
MBA
forth.
lingo.
Yeah, MBA lingo. But let me tell you, from Ramayana, there is a beautiful framework. It's called Shadgunya, which is 6 values framework, right? And what it does is it sort of works very beautifully when you're faced with a difficult decision, right? So the 6 values are basically Sandhi, which means an alliance, okay? Vigraha, which means battle, conflict, competition. Yana, which means innovation, building capability, strengthening internally. Asana, which means staying still, but staying still not by sleeping, but by being active, and watching what's happening, but not choosing to react in the moment, right? The 5th one is what we call Dvaidi Bhav, which means strategic ambiguity, not disclosing your intent to your competitors. Having 2 or 3 or multiple strategies at play simultaneously. And then the last one is what we call Samashray, which means taking shelter under a much stronger power, right? Getting into alliance, right? So if you were to, sort of, these are very, I'll say, Sanskrit or technical conceptual terms. But let me bring it home in terms of using real life business situations, right? So Sandhi, think of Apple iOS versus Android, Google Android. They're competitors, right? But what made Android the largest market share, have the largest market share in mobile OS? It's because of Sandhi, the alliance between Google and Samsung. So when you look at Google, Google brings the technology, the software, the product essentially. While Samsung was great at hardware, the mobile phone, their distribution network, and their marketing muscle. Unparalleled. So they combine, and then they have, you see what's happened, right? They have more than 70% of the mobile market share, number one. Number two, when you look at, for example, Vigraha competition, what's happening in the world of AI now? It's open conflict, it's battle. You have Anthropic,
Yes.
OpenAI, you have Microsoft, you have Meta, you have Amazon, you name it. Everybody's there in that battle, right? Are they earning money out of it?
They're competing right now.
They're not earning money. They're not just not earning money, they're burning hundreds of billions of dollars
They're competing for the market share. So that's the
Exactly.
goal.
So
It's
that
the
is
earning money is not the goal.
exactly.
So-
So it's about market share, being the number one, the fastest finger first.
Right.
So that is what you see, open battle. That is Vigraha or competition, right? The third one is what we call Yana. This is a beautiful example. What does Amazon have to do with AWS? Amazon is a retail company.
Yes.
AWS is a cloud platform. There's nothing in common with them. But why did Amazon create AWS? It was a moonshot project for them, right? So there was this very famous story where Andy Jassy went to Jeff Bezos and said, "Let's create a we have built such a beautiful e-commerce platform. Let's create a something which we can share with everybody in the industry, and it creates a very nice revenue stream." And you know what they did? While they were based in Seattle, where did they set up the skunk works for AWS? In Johannesburg, South Africa. Why? It's far away from home. And what was it? A moonshot project, which had nothing to do with the core product, which is their retail business, which was their, selling books and, all the, being a typical retailer, right? But guess who's the CEO or who's the CEO of Amazon today? Andy Jassy. Why? Because AWS, if you look at the contribution of AWS, the OPENC or EBIT contribution of AWS is 60% of Amazon's overall profits. In 2024, AWS contributed the biggest profit number to whole of Amazon. So much so that they use that money to obviously cross-subsidize their retail business, right? So when you look at that, it's a perfect example of Vyana. And similarly, when you look at asana is staying still. We all know about Oracle, 70s database company, almost dead, given up. Wasn't a darling at all, right? But guess what happened last year? It was not the FANG, or that big seven. It was out of that big seven, but it was the eighth company which hit $1 trillion in terms of valuation. Why? Because they were not competing in the big OpenAI, big AI, LLM, battle. They just said our core capability is Oracle and cloud and building data centers. So they built their core capability, or they were working, internally. They were staying still, not in terms of, competition, but they were building their own core capabilities, right? And at the end of the day, they required so much capacity in their data centers that OpenAI signed a $400 billion contract with Oracle. And suddenly the market woke up and Oracle was $1 trillion. And for a moment, Larry Ellison was the richest person in the world, beating Elon Musk, right? Why? Because of their long bet, right? The choice that they made not to enter into open conflict with everybody, right? Similarly, when you look at Dvaiti Bhava, there's a beautiful example. In fact, I read it today, okay? And we know that Apple iOS and Android, Google Android are competitors, right? They fight big time. But do you know who's powering Apple's AI? It's Google. And Apple is paying Google $1 billion. Okay, there's one more interesting example. Do you know that Google and Apple have a commercial agreement? Google pays Apple $20 billion every year for being the default search engine on iOS devices. And this was a subject of a lawsuit in California as well last year, where this was anti-competition activity. So somebody filed a lawsuit. The point here is that Dvaiti Bhava is about having multiple strategies at play at the same time. So the concept of a frenemy or co-opetition existed long time back. And then the last one is what I call Samashya. Samashya is taking shelter under a bigger power, right? What does this mean? Think of Shark Tank. What is Shark Tank? You have a bunch of startups which showcase their innovation, their product, their company in front of a bunch of sharks who are, let's say, exited and entrepreneurs or founders with some, money in their wallet. the startups get brand visibility and sort of the guardianship or the advice or the expertise of the founders, while the founders are getting a deal pipeline. They're getting innovation, so everybody wins. So if you think in terms of all these strategies, the frameworks that we are talking about, so like I said, you apply this Shadgunya framework to any decision that we are making, and then you can decide, whether to partner or innovate, whether to ally or whether to compete, whether to, sort of work with one strategy or multiple strategies at play, right? So it's a very, I'll say, versatile framework. In fact, I think it's the new, or it's better than the, the 4P, the 7S, and the BCG matrix, right? And so on and so forth. So yeah, so Shadgunya, the 6 values which you can use to define any decision at a point in time.
Well, I think that's a very comprehensive framework that you've told us about. Definitely more comprehensive than the other management frameworks that we have read about. And since we talk about different markets, we talk about positioning, we talk about taking these decisions, let's talk about scaling from India. So scaling from India looks very different than doing it from any other nation.
True.
It's high volume, it's low margin, incredible diversity within everything. So there's a different kind of grit and structure that's usually required. And we often talk about the Indian Jugaad, which is like the frugal innovation. And do you still think that's a sustainable way to build global tech right now? Or do you think that's a strategy that India needs to outgrow to become a global product nation?
The answer is a bit nuanced. It's both in my view. So Jugaad can be defined in 2 ways. One can be, frugal innovation or innovation with constraints, which means think UPI. What UPI has achieved, right? The ability to, scale from almost nothing to a large part of our payments happening through digital means, right? So that is an example, a brilliant example of what you call innovation with constraints, right? But where we are talking about Jugaad as scotch tape, lazy work, not building a great product or taking shortcuts or compromises on the product or the solution or the offer, eventually compromising the, sort of the consumer experience or, compromising on fundamentals of the product, then that I would say is what should not be scaled. So Jugaad, as long as we're talking about innovation driven by constraint, works, but Jugaad that is scotch tape innovation, which is sort of not designing good foundations of a product, that I would say is absolutely not scalable. So, to answer your question, Jugaad works provided it is, the former and not the latter.
So we are seeing a lot of toxic productivity in the startup world, and your mission is around Dharma-based leadership as well. So is it a moral compass that you are trying to reintroduce into the growth at all cost culture right now?
There's a confusion, right? The confusion is that the right path and growth are in tension, are in conflict. Well, that's not true. Okay? The truth is that the right path and growth can be done together. Yes, it means making difficult choices at some point in time, but we've seen in numerous examples, where startups have gone, think of, our big edutech startup in India, we recently, every day it's in the headlines, right? So there was something that happened foundationally in the company, right? Which meant that, their mission, it became growth at all costs. Growth at all costs means that, even for $1 billion, a multi-billion dollar company, it would sort of, hit them. Think of all the failures that we've seen in, or big corporate, ethical failures that we've seen over the last, 20, 25 years, right from the time of Enron to WorldCom to, to the recent, that famous example where you had the blood testing company, right, in the US, to even, our own edutech company, right? So in my view, foundationally, if things are not built in the right way, then, eventually they'll fall down, right?
So, like, I mean, foundationally makes sense. It is possible that a founder intends to be dharmic, ethical,
Correct.
righteous. Do you think a founder can truly be dharmic, ethical, or righteous when there is a cutthroat competition for market share with a competitor who is not ethical? Foundationally, it makes sense. A person can choose ethics, but when somebody needs to be in that cutthroat battle with somebody who's not playing by the rules, how can a founder navigate that?
I feel this is, there's this artificial dichotomy that is, or artificial decisioning that is being created, right? I feel fundamentally the right path is not different from the growth path, right? Growth at all costs, if it can't be by misleading the partners, it can't be by cheating the customers, it can't be by, sort of fooling the investors. Eventually it'll be caught. There's no way in which company can survive for a long time by indulging in any of these practices. So the point essentially is, how do you build that within the product itself? You got to compete on your strengths, which is build a great product, build great service around it, have a great team. Obviously, it's a it needs to be dynamic, it needs to be very, very, sort of on the very agile, on the feet kind of work. But it's never about, because someone has made a moral compromise, we also do that, because eventually it's going to be what we call fundamentally destructive in the company. And we've seen numerous examples, right? The famous edutech company being one of them.
So you've spent 25 years in big tech giants, right? And how do you ensure that you stay on the mission without getting burnt out or becoming a cog in the machine,
Yeah.
which is massive?
In big companies, there are many different departments, many different business units, many different functions, right? At the end of the day, it's about two things in my view, right? One is what we call, what I take from Hanuman, what I talked about, which was agency. In a particular role, how much am I, sort of contributing? What am I delivering? Basis my own initiative, right? So eventually that becomes a very important factor. The second, in my view, is constant reinvention. We cannot be doing one thing, the same thing over 25 years. So I can tell you, I started as a sales guy. In fact, as a as a field sales guy. Then I went into sales operations. Then I did another part of sales, inside sales, as it was called in Dell. Then I did outside sales, which is being in the field and meeting customers. Then I did product marketing. Then I did business unit marketing. Then I did marketing analytics. Then I did e-commerce. Then I ran a big e-commerce business for multiple markets, multiple countries, for a region. And then I did digital transformation. So if you see, this illustrates the second point which I was talking about, right? So you cannot continue to do the same thing in the same company for a long time, even in different companies. We need to constantly reinvent ourselves, like learn new skills. And that's how, we'll be sustainable over a period of time. But most importantly, Shreya, is the concept of agency, the concept of ownership, the concept of taking something, owning it, and driving it to completion, right? Which is inescapable. And perhaps I'd say the last thing now is that those 25-year careers, in my view, no longer exist.
Yeah.
I feel things have changed completely, right? So here, I think the first point, the reinvention becomes a lot more important. What am I doing, with my skills, with the help of AI? Because we know that AI is going to have a big impact on jobs across the world, right? Especially where it's repetitive work, right? So in that sense, how are we, what do I bring on the table with the help of AI? How am I reinventing myself? What can I learn? What can I do more? Whether within an organizational setup or outside it. That in my view, doesn't matter. So taking that ownership of my own learning and my own career becomes that much more important nowadays than, what we had, say, a couple of decades back, where you had, talent development teams and organizational development teams and training sessions. Well, they are still there, but, you know, but agency for my own career becomes much more important. For my own learning becomes that much more important. My own reinvention becomes that much more important.
So you transition from being a C-suite executive to founder in Indian knowledge, system space, which is again, I want to understand, where did the reinvention come here? What was the thought process when you made that shift and you moved from a certain kind of a career to more of a purposeful career?
Yeah.
Right. So how did that come across?
Sure. I mean, so for me, it was, there's a backstory to this. The backstory is that during COVID, we all went through a lot of churn, right? And what happened at that point in time was that in my organization, there were young people who were impacted by COVID and lost their lives, right? So that led to a lot of, let's say, thinking, deep thinking on my part. And eventually, what does career mean? What is my goal? What is my purpose, right? And at that point in time, I started thinking a lot more about, what do I want to do for the next 25 years, right? And that's how I hit upon my purpose, right? So I have this principle, which I call 25, 25, 25. Let me talk about it. So the first 25 years of our life, we are preparing for life. We are students. We are born, we are students, we are learning, just learning to stand on our own feet. The next 25 years are all about, building. It's about building a career, building a family, sort of standing on our own feet, finding a financial footing, a family footing, and so on and so forth. In my view, the third 25 is where we find a purpose. We find something, a purpose, a work, a North Star, which is bigger than ourselves, which is about giving back. And that's what, sort of triggered that thinking in me. So I turned 50 last year. So for me, this was the time when I said, okay, I'm entering my third 25. So what is my North Star? What is my purpose? And my purpose, was, understanding the ancient wisdom and building that bridge between ancient wisdom to modern leadership, right? And that's what I've been working on. And that is the sort of the pivot that I took in the last couple of years. But let me tell you, it was planned. It isn't easy because you need to set, your financial foundations in place before you make a risky journey like this.
And so for a young AI enthusiast who's just entering that career, what is one piece of advice from ancient wisdom that they should carry in their pocket without making sure they don't lose their soul in the code?
Yeah. It's the first point that we started with. It's about viveka. It's about discernment, keeping their judgment, with them, not relinquishing, not resigning the judgment to AI. AI is just a tool. AI is not a thinking, it doesn't have purpose. It can't discern. It won't have, a North Star. It can't motivate people. So in my view, the most important thing, for a young person, as they're entering career, is to continue to build on their judgment, which is discernment, the ability to make choices. The second, in my view, is to, sort of build relationships with people. And what I've realized, and I've personally made this mistake, and at the beginning of my career, is not focus on relationships, whether they are within an organization or outside of it. Those are extremely, extremely important, and not just in terms of, a casual hello or a coffee chat, but really meaningful relationships, right? Why? Because, they are investments. And the third thing is about real on the ground, in the field, in the market experiences, right? So we had this thing both in Levi's and in L'Oreal. The CEO used to go to the market once a month. You're not sitting in the boardroom. You're not, you don't only make decisions in a boardroom. If we don't know the customer, if we are not spending time with the customer or with, the people who are on their feet, the feet on the street, for any organization, then we are not learning. So in my view, that is real experience where the, sort of the organizational rubber hits the road, which is where the revenue comes from. So we need to spend time with our customers. In a large organization, your customers could be sitting elsewhere, but in that case, have a virtual coffee chat with them. Where learn from your internal customers, spend time with them, understand what are their challenges and how you could, sort of work towards solving them. So to, sort of recap the three principles that I'm talking about, right? The first is vivek, the discernment, keep your judgment. The second and the most important thing is build on your relationships. The third most important thing in my view is be with your customer, be on the ground. You can never sit in a boardroom and learn anything.
And so, your the way you're writing on LinkedIn, it has almost reached over 1 million views now. And these are not Sanskrit scholars; these are technology professionals, founders. And so, what does that tell you about the hunger that is there around this kind of understanding the thinking and the frameworks that are coming from ancient scriptures?
Honestly speaking, I was surprised myself about it. When I started writing, about Ramayana, and connecting that or bridging that with modern leadership, I didn't realize that there was so much latent hunger, in the in the professionals or the modern generation now, right? And what I've realized is that everybody is interested in, going back to our roots and connecting with our roots, connecting with our culture. Because we always operate within a particular context. Mm-hmm. And that context includes culture as well, right? And taking the learnings from our culture and applying them to make ourselves happier, more effective, much more collaborative people is what I think what we are aiming for or gunning for. And so I was like really, really pleased or surprised, I'll say happily surprised to see that, I'm reaching a large audience, right? And yeah, so that kind of validates my work too.
Amazing. And so now we are moving to a rapid fire round. If you weren't in the corporate or digital world, what path do you think you would take?
I'd be a teacher any day.
What was the first moment in your career where you felt this is going to change everything?
Yeah, so when I started reading Ramayana and I saw that the parallels to the corporate world were so close, and that meant a big change for me, a big pivot for me.
One piece of technology you were initially skeptical about, but now fully believe in.
Yeah. Surprisingly, for a digital marketer, it's social media and commerce on social media. Mm-hmm. I saw the experiments that Instagram, Facebook, and the likes of it did, but I'm really surprised to hear and see, the success of commerce on social platforms, especially TikTok commerce, and now what you see on Instagram as well, right? So,
what is one leadership habit you had to unlearn over time?
Sometimes you have to give space to others to make a decision, even though, I may have seen the problem, I have seen the solution, I've analyzed it well, and I can, recommend a solution. That doesn't work always. Speed, being the smartest in the room doesn't work. Or, humility and listening to the team and giving space to the team works a lot, right? And that is the most important thing.
If you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice at the start of your career, what would it be?
Build relationships.
One book that has shaped how you think.
Valmiki Ramayana.
In one word, what does leadership mean to you today?
People first.
If you had to build a company from scratch today, what would you focus on first? Product, people, or culture?
I'll say people and culture. Both go together. They are not separate from each other. So culture and people has to be together in my opinion.
Okay. And so with that, Anil, we have come to the end of our podcast for today. Thank you for being with us. And we learned so much about how to apply different frameworks from ancient wisdom to modern day business as well as companies. So it was super helpful. I'm sure that it is a very different way to look at things.
Thank you, Shreya. It was a wonderful conversation with you. Lovely to, sort of discuss so many things, that we have in common, from digital to ancient wisdom, bridging that, the common current world. A great conversation. Thanks so much for having me here.
My pleasure. So we have come to the end for our podcast for today, and we learned so much about leadership principles from ancient wisdoms from the Ramayana. So as we go about our management books, learning about different frameworks, we should also give a credit and understanding to the frameworks that the ancient wisdom also brings to us, all in terms of leadership as well as governing ourselves in the current modern day world. So till the next time we learn about different industries, it is sort of good to go back to your epics and have a read. Thank you.